In the latest escalation of violence, Russia initiated its sixth airstrike on Ukraine's capital within the month. Despite this aggressive action, Ukrainian authorities report that all hostile drones were successfully intercepted and neutralized, with initial findings showing no damage or fatalities. This aerial offensive by Russia is believed to be in response to Ukraine's recent assault on Moscow. Serhiy Popko, the individual at the helm of Kyiv's military administration, noted that the airborne alert endured for a duration of 3 hours. Throughout this period, all aerial threats were identified and eradicated as they neared Kyiv. As per the currently available information, the capital has managed to avoid any casualties or destruction. Moreover, the Ukrainian Air Force raised warnings of impending drone strikes in the southern territories of Odessa and Mykolaiv. These regions, forming part of Ukraine's Black Sea coast, house key port infrastructure. In recent times, these areas have been subjected to constant drone and missile attacks from Moscow. This intensified assault comes in the wake of Russia's withdrawal from an agreement that previously ensured the secure transportation of grain from Ukraine. Within the last 24 hours, Russian military forces have initiated a considerable offensive involving a missile strike, 49 air raids, and the firing of multiple launch rocket systems, MLRS, over 40 times. Roughly 20 battlefield clashes have transpired during this time period. In the Volyn, Polishya, Seversky, and Slobozhansky areas, the status quo has mostly been maintained, with little change in the strategic situation. On the Kupiansk front, Ukrainian soldiers are holding their defensive positions steadfastly. Meanwhile, Russian forces made unsuccessful attempts to advance south of the Luhansk region's Dnipro in the Lyman sector. Turning to the Bakhmut front, Ukrainian defense units have successfully thwarted Russian incursions to the east of the Donetsk region's Stupokki and in the vicinity of Avdiivka. In the Donetsk region near Avdiivka, Ukrainian forces have effectively resisted Russian onslaughts. They are also enduring and repelling the Russian surge near Marinka. In the Zaporizhzhia and Kherson sectors, Russian invaders are making concentrated efforts to impede the progression of Ukrainian forces. Simultaneously, the Ukrainian defense forces persist in their offensive operations, particularly in the Melitopol and Berdyansk sectors, further solidifying their control within recaptured territories. The United States State Department has issued a cautionary statement that Russia could be planning a deceptive operation, often referred to as a false flag event, in the Black Sea region. This comes against the backdrop of numerous attacks on port facilities in southern Ukraine. Matthew Miller, spokesperson for the State Department, revealed that last week, Russia had performed a mock attack on a simulated ship in the Black Sea. Miller indicated that they have information pointing towards Russia's potential orchestration of a false flag operation. Simultaneously, Miller conceded that, unless sea routes are reopened, no ideal alternative exists that could facilitate Ukraine in exporting grain volumes comparable to those managed under the Black Sea Grain Initiative. The Washington Post reported on July 25th, citing intelligence evaluations, that Russia's autocratic leader, Vladimir Putin, was alerted by Russia's FSB security service to the planned insurrection by Yevgeny Prigozhin, the chief of Wagner PMC, at least a couple of days in advance. To bolster security, critical locations including the Kremlin were fortified, and Putin's personal guards were augmented with additional personnel and weaponry. However, no further actions were undertaken. A European official mentioned that Putin had ample opportunity to dismantle the rebellion and apprehend the conspirators. But as the revolt started to unfold, there was a widespread paralysis, marked by confusion and shock. For an extended period, the appropriate response seemed elusive. In the absence of directives from the top, local authorities, including those in Rostov-on-Don, were left to their own devices, ultimately taking no action to halt the heavily armed rebels. With no explicit orders to quell the rebellion, many local officials came to believe that the insurrection had some level of concurrence from the Kremlin. Should Prigozhin have been successful, some of Russia's high-ranking figures were prepared to accept him, a senior NATO official informed the Washington Post. Ordinary soldiers also favored Prigozhin's potential success, believing he might instigate reforms in the army command, making their battle efforts easier. An official noted that there seemed to be influential individuals within the power structures who may have been anticipating such a development. If Prigozhin's attempt had garnered more success, they might have aligned themselves with the plot. According to the newspaper, another unnamed European official confirmed that numerous people, even those at the top of the security services and military, backed Prigozhin's ambition to topple Russia's upper military leadership. However, to some, this failed coup indicates the inception of a larger upheaval in Russia. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov dismissed these intelligence evaluations as baseless conjectures by individuals with no credible information in response to the newspaper's inquiry. Ukrainian troops operating in the Kherson region have notably widened their stronghold on the islands situated east of the main Dnipro riverbed. Recent data further elucidate the extensive damage inflicted by Ukraine's assault on Russian airfields in Crimea. Following weeks of fruitless counteroffensives, Russian troops suffered significant losses, compelling them to halt their advances against the Ukrainian island positions. The scenario deteriorated to such an extent that Russian analysts universally welcomed the news of the retreat. They additionally noted that such changes bode well for the further extension of the bridgehead, and that Ukrainian forces will assuredly aim to approach Oleshki, secure a fire control over the peripheral line, expel Russian troops from the fringes, and potentially seize Oleshki. As of now, Russian forces have commenced bombing operations encompassing not only the immediate vicinity of the bridge, but also residential areas several kilometers to the west, implying the enlargement of the Ukrainian bridgehead. It is, indeed, verified that Ukrainian troops have crossed the minor river and gained control over the residential structures on the adjoining island. Moreover, a massive Ukrainian strike decimated the headquarters of the occupying authorities in Oleshki, signifying clear intent. Additional information has surfaced regarding Ukraine's previous strike on a Crimean airfield. Newly released satellite imagery reveals 2 blazing hangars. Despite the airfield not being actively utilized for aviation, it maintained its function as a military base. This incident marks the second ammunition depot lost by the Russians in Crimea, and indications suggest that it's unlikely to be the last. In the Bakhmut sector of Donetsk Oblast, eastern Ukraine, the Ukrainian army is making incremental progress near the settlement of Avdiivka. According to Colonel Serhiy Cheravaty, the spokesman for the eastern group of Ukraine's armed forces, the liberation of this area would notably enhance the tactical positioning of Ukrainian forces, setting a platform for further success and the eventual expulsion of Russian forces from Bakhmut. Cheravaty stated, Avdiivka, as well as any settlements around Bakhmut that will be recaptured, allow us to complete the operation to encircle Bakhmut or drive the enemy out. We continue to liberate our land by hundreds of meters every day. Over the last week, the count has gone up to kilometers, and when the time comes, it will go up to tens of kilometers. Cheravaty underlined that the primary objective of the Ukrainian military command is to maintain a measured advance that ensures minimal casualties among Ukrainian troops, while concurrently dealing substantial damage and inflicting heavy losses on the adversary. Ukraine's defense minister, Oleksiy Reznikov, has acknowledged that the country's summer offensive is behind schedule, but maintained that it is still proceeding according to plan. In an interview with CNN, Reznikov explained the complexities of the situation, including Russia's air superiority, the issue of mines, and the substantial number of Russian forces. Reznikov emphasized the need to preserve the lives of Ukrainian soldiers, contrasting it with Russia's approach of deploying inadequately trained and equipped forces in what have been termed as meat waves. In response, Ukraine has adjusted its strategy to focus on eliminating large quantities of Russian forces and equipment, rather than territorial gains. An early June attempt by Ukraine's armed forces, AFU, to penetrate Russian lines in the Tavria region was thwarted near the town of Mala Tokmakka, with casualty numbers reaching up to 50, according to unofficial counts. Since then, the AFU has adopted a more cautious approach, using smaller combined infantry and armor units to advance on Russian positions after heavy bombardment. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has suggested that the summer offensive might pick up pace soon. In a national TV statement, he stated that Ukraine's southern offensive was largely going according to plan, and that Russian forces were experiencing serious losses. He hinted at an increase in the intensity of Ukrainian attacks in the coming days, and promised numerous events that will strengthen Ukraine's defense. The lower house of the Russian state Duma has passed a bill aiming to raise the upper age limit for military conscription from 27 to 30 years. This move comes as Russia seeks to replenish its frontline soldiers engaged in the ongoing conflict with Ukraine. Andrei Kartapolov, head of the Duma Defense Committee, cited the serious demographic situation and its impact on mobilization resources as the primary reason for the proposed change. During the spring military conscription of 2023, 147,000 Russians were called to service, and the expanded age limits are intended to maintain and potentially increase this figure. Additionally, the proposed law would also prohibit citizens from leaving the country if they receive a summons from the military recruitment office, whether they are at their place of work or study. Medical and educational organizations will be required to provide electronically the data on citizens necessary for maintaining military records. The bill, however, still needs to be approved by the upper house of the Duma and signed by Russian leader Vladimir Putin. The voting by the Russian Federation Council and Putin's signature are scheduled for Friday. The new law, if enacted, would come into effect from January 1, 2024. As of my knowledge cutoff in September 2021, it was a requirement for all Russian men aged 18, 27 to complete a one-year term of compulsory military service.